Welcome to the Fear and Greed Afternoon Report for Thursday, the 10th of February 2022. I'm Sean Aylmer. Every afternoon, we bring you the 5 news items that happened today that you need to know about. Let's jump into it. Story number 1, the local bourse closed up slightly today to 7,289 points. There were all sorts of movements on the exchange today, mostly from companies reporting earnings. Where to start? Well, energy giant AGL said it was bringing forward closing dates of 2 of its coal-fired power stations and announced a drop in underlying profit of more than 40%. That triggered a share price fall of 3%. The boss of the ASX, that's the business that runs the exchange, said he was stepping down, causing a 4% drop in its share price, while engineering group CIMIC's share price fell 7% after it outlined disappointing profits. AMP reported a decent set of numbers and its share price jumped 5%. Away from earnings results, the banks did pretty well today, led by National Australia Bank. More of that shortly. Fortescue Metals was up nearly 4%, while Rio jumped 2%. Macquarie Group, Aristocrat Leisure and Sonic Healthcare were all down a couple of percent. Story number 2 is all about National Australia Bank. The country's second largest lender said cash earnings for the quarter were $1.8 billion, beating market expectations. That triggered a 4.3% jump in its share price. But just like the other 3, Commonwealth Bank, Westpac and ANZ, its profit margins have been squeezed. NAB said costs were higher as well, in part from high pressures on salaries. The Melbourne-based bank said lending to homeowners and small businesses was better. NAB is definitely the favoured bank at the moment among the large investors. Story number 3 comes from Canberra. The federal government's controversial religious discrimination legislation was passed by the House this morning at about 5 a.m, but is now likely to head to a Senate committee, meaning it won't become law anytime soon, certainly not before the next election. The legislation eventually passed the House after 5 coalition members crossed the floor to support Labor amendments for better legal protections for transgender students. Story number 4 comes from the US. SpaceX, that's Elon Musk's business, its newest fleet of satellites are tumbling out of orbit after being hit by a solar storm. Up to 40 of the 49 small satellites launched last week have either re-entered the atmosphere and burned up or are on the verge of doing so. The geomagnetic storm last Friday made the atmosphere denser, increasing the drag on the Starlink satellites, according to Associated Press. Now, SpaceX still has close to 2,000 Starlink satellites orbiting Earth, and they're providing internet services mostly to remote parts of the world. For example, they're being used to help reconnect Tonga to the internet after the underground volcanic explosion last month. But that is a very, very expensive storm when you lose 40 satellites. And finally, story number 5 comes from the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has scrapped formal pandemic restrictions, meaning from the 21st of February, people will no longer have to self-isolate if they test positive for COVID-19. Now, that date is when schools go back after a midterm break. The government will still recommend people not go to work or school if they test positive, but mandatory self-isolation will be a thing of the past. Mr. Johnson said COVID was shifting from pandemic to endemic. There are still around 55,000 new infections in the UK every day and 200 deaths, though that's about half the level of a month ago. That's it for the afternoon report for Thursday, the 10th of February 2022. Don't forget to hit follow on the podcast and find Fear and Greed on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. Join Michael Thompson and I tomorrow morning for the Friday Fast 5 by Fear and Greed. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your evening.